Welcome to Focus, Faith, and Fueling, the Winning Edge podcast, where young athletes, parents, and coaches learn how mindset, nutrition, and faith work together to elevate performance, resilience, and overall health.
What you eat and how you think can elevate and transform your game. If you're ready to gain a true mental edge, fuel your body with purpose, and stay grounded in what truly matters, then this podcast is for you.
We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, author, coach, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom to two young athletes.
And I'm Stacy, sports dietitian, author, speaker, and nutritional consultant for over 19 years, and a mom of two teen athletes. Welcome back to the Winning Edge podcast. Today, we're diving into relative energy deficiency in sport, or REDS. When an athlete's body is burning more energy than it's getting back over time, that gap starts to affect hormones, growth, bones, mood, and performance. This isn't rare. Many young athletes are showing at least some signs of low energy availability across both girls and boys in all kinds of sports. With year-round competition and pressure to be lean, risk is rising faster than awareness. To unpack all of this, I'm joined today by sports dietitian and REDS specialist, Rebecca McConville. Rebecca is not just a sports dietitian, but also an eating disorder specialist and the leading international expert on relative energy deficiency in sport, or what is often known as REDS. Over the past decade, Rebecca has specialized in the intersection of sport, REDS, and eating disorders, working with youth, collegiate, professional, and performing arts athletes, including consulting for UMKC Athletics, the Kansas City Ballet, a multitude of local colleges, and previously the Kansas City Chiefs. She is the author of Finding Your Sweet Spot, How to Avoid REDS, and creator of the REDS-Informed Provider Certification Masterclass for clinicians. Rebecca also co-hosts the Fit for a Queen podcast, focused on female athletes, and frequently speaks and teaches nationally on REDS. She's known for making complex science understandable for everyone, and for building teams around athletes so they're not trying to climb out of REDS alone. If you've ever wondered, is this training just hard? Why is my child not developing? Or tired? Why are they not able to gain weight? Is something actually wrong? This episode is for you. Here's what we'll cover in this deep dive. What is REDS or RED-S? How does it show up? How is it diagnosed? What do treatment and recovery usually look like? We'll finish the episode with clear actions, red flags that athletes shouldn't ignore, what parents can ask at clinical visits, and how coaches can create a culture that supports fueling and rest instead of glorifying the grind through fatigue. By the end, you'll have a simple framework to recognize REDS sooner, ask better questions, and protect both performance and long-term health for the athletes in your life. Rebecca, thank you so much for being on with us today. I'm really excited for our guests to get to hear from you.
My pleasure. Be careful. Once you get me talking about REDS, it's hard for me to stop.
I love it. I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, you and I have that in common. I will tell you, this has been a space. So I sought you out because you have such strong expertise in this space. And as a sports dietitian who's really just kind of learning a lot about REDS, I'm realizing how much I didn't even know as a dietitian and an expert in this space. And so I'm just grateful to get to hear from you today, grateful to get for you to share with our athletes. So explain in sort of teen language and for our parents that are listening, what it means when we talk about what is REDS and we say your body is spending more energy than it's getting back.
Okay.
And over time, that starts to change your hormones, your growth, your bone density, mood, performance. Explain that in layman's terms to our listeners.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'm talking teen language. Should I start with bruh? Like,
oh my gosh. Yes, you should. Now, my 16-year-old would roll his eyes at us, but yes, you absolutely should.
I have a 16-year-old too, so I'm surrounded by them all the time. So I think even at that age group, down to single digit athletes, we can understand terms, financial terms. So simplistically, it means that there is a mismatch between the amount of deposits coming in, so our food or calories, to the amount of withdrawals. And there's a couple ways that people misstep. Either they don't know, period, or they really haven't taken the time to kind of sit and reflect on where their withdrawals are coming from. So it could be sport, but adolescent athletes, they are growing. There is no way to predict when a growth spurt's going to happen. We can see sometimes symptoms and signs like hunger, tiredness, etc. but we sure as heck don't want there to not be energy there for the growth that's getting ready to happen. Activities of daily living. So that could be a PE class, that could be if they have a job, etc. And then if they tend to move around at home a lot, like pacing, fidgeting, all of those things are withdrawals, and we have to make sure we have the deposits coming in. Otherwise, our brain and our body is brilliant. And so just like on our phone, when you start to decrease this, that's why I'm talking teen talk, but even adults we're susceptible to this. When we start getting to 25%, 10%, apps don't work right. There's a lag if we're trying to watch Netflix on our
Yep,
phone.
battery life is struggling.
Yep. And so the same thing happens within our body. And at first, the body tries to alert you, hey, we're running low on energy. You need to increase your intake. But patterns that we see is, oh, but I eat the same all the time. So therefore, something's wrong with why I'm being more hungry. Or they're so busy because nowadays, these teens and college age, I mean, they are from the time they get up till the time they go to bed, busy, busy, busy. And so
Mhm.
there's not a lot of time for connection or what we call interoceptive awareness. And the other pieces, and you can really speak to this, Stacy, is in the grocery store, we have so many kind of like fake fortified foods
Mhm.
that can skew their hunger if it's, protein waters, fiber bars,
Oh my
etc.
gosh, protein in everything.
Yes, God, it's gonna be
Things
in the
that
air
don't need
for a
it.
while. We're gonna have infusers that put protein in the air, which then creates like a fake fullness and skews again their ability to understand hunger and fullness. So those are some of the patterns that I see specifically with young athletes. If that gets ignored, then the body's like, uh-oh, something's wrong. Let's start slowing down. So we dim down or those apps start to shut off. And so that shows up for a lot in digestion. So anytime your kiddo, or if you're listening to this and you are a young athlete and all of a sudden you're starting to struggle with early fullness, you're not going to the bathroom regularly like you used to, or all of a sudden you're having intolerance to foods that weren't there before, that may be a sign that your body is trying to do everything it can to get every last bit of energy from that food, or it can't keep up with producing digestive enzymes to break that down as well. Sleep disturbances. You may start all of a sudden being more restless at night and you're not sleeping as deeply and you don't wake up as rested. These are very subtle things, especially at that age with as busy as they are, to overlook. But those are the patterns that I see. And then as that continues on, the body's like, now we're really in crisis mode. Let's start shutting down some of these energy pathways like bones of luxury. We don't need to grow right now if all of a sudden we're in crisis. Reproductive health. So menstrual cycle for girls, sex drive for boys, which is uncomfortable to talk about. And then it'll progress from there. And just slowly but surely, things end up going as slow as possible. Now, the way that can happen is you have three savings accounts. So the
Yeah,
liver
I wanna go back
supplies,
to the savings account analogy because it's like really what you're saying is that you're drawing energy or you're putting energy in, and what happens then in the savings account analogy where when that doesn't look sufficient, what
right?
happens?
Yeah. So your body has three places it can go to tap in for energy. So the liver supplies the brain, and you really have a short amount of energy that it can use from there, which is incidentally why to actually get into a state of reds, because I'll hear this from sometimes parents or the athletes themselves, but they eat all the time, they snack all the time. Well, 250 to 400 calorie difference between what you should be taking in and what you're expending over 5 days can start hormonal dysfunction. That's as simple as accidentally, like I've seen this pattern. We normally have trail mix in the winter, but then yummy watermelon comes in season in the summer. And so they switch out that snack.
So
Or,
they're eating, but those calories look very different.
yes, or their schedule shifts and they're like, oh, well, now it's track practice at 2:30. I don't really have much time for snack, or I'm nervous about getting that in. And so they cut that out and they think they're going to make it up later. And so then that means the brain starts sending signals, uh-oh, either we're not getting the energy in or it's taking too long to get to the brain. So for an athlete, what that means is your reaction time starts slowing down.
Mm.
Or for runners, they might notice difference in their cadence or their turnover and stride. And so again, that brain is glitching. It's not having the muscle contraction or reaction like it normally would. because it's too slow getting the energy there. So then the body's like, all right, we got the second account, and that's our body fat. And of course, everybody in our culture today is like, fine, drain that one past zero. But we have failed to recognize that body fat is an active endocrine organ that is very important for our health.
So you're saying they're not getting enough calories, so they're depleting the additional sources stored in the liver, and then they're going to fat cells. And I think to your point, a lot of folks kind of unfortunately, given their view of aesthetics and how we think about body, don't understand the value. Kevin Hall actually did a really
Mhm.
great job in his book recently on there's a whole chapter on the importance of fat. And for athletes, like just before you move on, can you talk about fat?
Mhm.
Athletes really need to be metabolically diverse. And what people don't understand is they're tapping between carb sources for energy and those fat stores for energy. So it's important they have some fat stores to tap into when
Absolutely.
exercise goes long.
Hmm. So for duration, then they get a nice blend between being able to use those fat stores to keep up their endurance. And then what's great about it is if they have that, then the glucose is on board for that kick at the end, the power up. If your body is completely reliant on that, then you don't have that. And that's where people will hit a wall, or they'll talk about how, like, oh, in my performance, I felt like I was going so strong. And then all of a sudden my legs locked up or I couldn't move. But even from the medical piece of it, first of all, for an adolescent athlete, and by adolescent, I should probably define that, that's actually for females up to 20 to 21 years of age and males up to 25. So that's into college. They're still wrapping up bone and brain development. That body fat is there to ensure that you're going to have adequate stores for puberty, just as in reverse, like when a female is wanting to get pregnant, the body has to have a certain amount of body fat to ensure that you can survive if you have a pregnancy. So
Which
other
is so
pieces.
important because I think so many parents are in this mindset where they're trying to be, especially many athletes' parents, because, they're competitive, they're usually well educated, they are highly informed around health. They're trying to get the lowest, leanest personal body mass. And sometimes what I see is a strategy for their own athletes to get that lowest, leanest body mass. But what I hear you saying, and I want to make sure our
Mhm.
listeners hear you saying, is that's not actually beneficial for these young teen competitive athletes that are in the midst of growth. Those fat stores are really important fuel sources to ensure they keep growing bone, producing their reproductive hormones, enhancing performance in the way that they need.
Yeah, here's something that's ironic. So if anybody ever pulls up a body fat percentage chart, and athletes, I'm gonna encourage you not to do this because it's not even based on science. A recent article said that for female athletes to remain eumenoric, which means that they have consistent menstrual cycles and have good bone density, they found that they had to be above 21% body fat. You go and look at that charts, that's on the cusp of being on the on considered overweight on body fat. So it's ironic again that we have a chart that if somebody was to push their child into that would end up backfiring and not be good for their physical and mental health.
Yeah, the same way we looked at BMI probably so
Ugh.
inappropriately for young athletes for so long, and poor female athletes especially. There's just so much emphasis put on this, and it's a really poor. I always give credit to Alona Mar. I think she's done such a great job for
Mhm.
female athletes of talking about what healthy bodies look like, and they don't
Exactly.
always look like a stereotype or some specific number on a scale.
No. And another hat I wear is I am actually an eating disorder specialist. So I spend a lot of time looking at growth charts. And if somebody could ever pull back and look at their child's growth chart, what's really cool is sometimes right before they do put on height, there is a bump in weight because, again, you need energy to grow
Yeah.
bone, ligaments, muscle, everything that comes with that. So you'll see in a nice, healthy child, they'll go up on a curve. Then guess what? A few months later, they go up in the height, then they settle in, and you'll just see this pattern. But when it's been disrupted, what you'll see is sometimes that growth stops or it
Mm.
falls under. That means that that's bone, that's ligaments, that's muscle, and that's brain tissue that did not grow during that time when we're expected to. So I encourage all my parents to make sure that they are checking with their pediatrician to make sure their kids are on their growth curve, stayed on their growth curve until that 21 to 25 years of age. The other thing we didn't speak to is, our fat soluble vitamins, which are so important, vitamin A, D, E, and K. So to simplify, that's eye health, that's immune system, that's our bone health, etc. They have to have fat and they store in fat too. And so again, as that gets depleted, that means we don't have that. And they're needed to make our hormone function. So I have to joke with my female athletes. While I don't know too many women that are like, yes, I love having my period. We do love the health benefits that come from that.
Yes.
But now we're learning the performance, right? So estrogen and testosterone dilate blood vessels. So think about like if, for those that are like, wait, dilate, what does that mean? When you get your eyes, right, your pupil opens up, those hormones open up your blood vessels in your heart, which pumps better blood flow to your muscles. So guess what? That means you're stronger, faster, swifter. So our
Mm.
hormones help with that performance piece of it as well. Third, and this is the one that people all agree they don't want to be using as savings account, is muscle. And
Mm.
so the way that that shows up is all of a sudden athletes will feel like they're no longer progressing in their performance. They might start getting the niggles, which are those little pesky injuries that don't completely take you out, but you're always having to go see the athletic trainer, or there's lots of aches and pains. And then they'll start to lose strength. But that's because you're now using muscle to survive, and that's never a good outcome.
Yeah, your body's breaking down your muscle mass. So you really think about as you're not fueling adequately, when you're not putting enough investment into that savings account, and you think about what you're drawing from your liver, yes, and that depletes really quickly. Then your fat stores, if you don't have any of those to begin with, that's a whole conversation. And then you're tapping into muscle mass. And
Mhm.
you think about that and you're, again, I go back to, I've just seen a higher and higher incidence in male athletes. So I think for a long time, talk about reds, we thought it was mostly female athletes, but can you talk about,
Mhm.
is this something we're now seeing more in both young male and female athletes?
100%. So part of that was because Reds expanded from what was formerly known as the female athlete triad, which was the triangle of a weight change, consecutive loss of 3 periods or more, and then a bone stress injury.
Mm.
Well, that obviously is just a couple different variables that we see when somebody's in a low energy state, and it only talked to females. So they expanded it, and then Reds was more holistic. It looked at your blood work, it looked at sleep, digestion, etc., and then they included males. We also, I know this is for young athletes, but a lot of times too, we're looking at even peri and postmenopausal athletes. Like if you are walking this world and you're inundated with all the messages that we get around nutrition, you are going to be susceptible to development of Reds. And Nikki Key, and I promise I'll get circle back to the mill piece. She actually thinks we should have the sport piece removed, because then even some of these active individuals that wouldn't label themselves as an athlete, to me, sometimes are some of the most compromised coming through my door because they've been prolonged in that low energy state. So patterns I
Mm.
see with males are that one, because they don't meet the quote unquote normal criteria, they're going for quite a while. And it's normally when they get injured or if they've had multiple injuries that somebody finally says, hey, you should take a look at your nutrition. Hopefully they've come and seen a sports reds informed dietitian, and then they look and like, oh wow, you've been underfueled for quite a while. Males also are still prone to being low carbohydrate intake as well. So
Oh,
that's
that's
the
a big one. I will tell you how many of my athletes we've diagnosed with Reds who've come in and I look at what they're eating and their only emphasis is on protein.
Mhm.
And to your point earlier, I want to circle back to this. Protein is a satiety nutrient, just like fat. And
Yes.
so when you're eating it at the beginning of your meal, you can oftentimes feel fuller, even though your body hasn't gotten the calories that it needs at that meal. And so it's like reprogramming our young men's brains to understand that, yes, protein is important. It's a component of a healthy diet, but it is not the only nutrient that's important.
Right. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That is a satiety hormone. And so that's going to make you stay fuller longer. And I always say, like, look, there's a reason why that is so promoted for weight loss. That's not a goal you have right now. So why would you be eating in that manner? Plus, it makes the body have to work harder. So really all you're doing is making the body have to use your protein for energy, and it's not going to go to building back your muscle. The other piece that is being explored, but we don't quite know the mechanism, is it seems males are more influenced by the discrepancy in their training volume to intake
Mm.
versus females are more impacted by their lack of nutrition coming in. So they're trying to figure out, is it like a byproduct of exokines that are secreted, which is basically hormones that happen from the stress of training, or is there some other mechanism there? That's a big question mark. And
That's
again, I don't.
interesting. So you're saying women are more infected because they're not putting enough into the savings account. They're not eating enough generally, for a lot of reasons there and variables. And there's probably a lot of unfortunate kind of projections onto women and young female athletes. I think that probably impact that somewhat in societal factors. But then men, it's more around just the amount of training they're doing and some of the byproducts of that training that are required in the body that are then causing additional nutritional needs they're not covering for.
Right.
So
Yeah. We're just tending to see that pattern more. And then the other piece of it too is because in the triad, a menstrual cycle, well, obviously males don't have that.
Mhm.
So we're having to really get clinicians and athlete providers comfortable with asking those questions to our male athletes regarding their sex drive, getting testosterone, which can be difficult with an adolescent male athlete because, again, they're going through puberty. So their hormones are going to be all over. But I'm so glad for communities like yours and clinicians that focus on young athletes because I think sometimes it gets diminished. Oh, they're young, they'll be resilient, their body can bounce back. But the ugly truth is, they may not because you can only restore so much bone density. And that's that critical period that they develop it to begin with. You're not developing new bone density when you're 35, you're recycling
Right.
and restoring it. And so we should be more aggressive. I'm going to give a shout out to Melissa Ritchie. She's a nurse practitioner. She's done some really awesome stuff with being adamant at these school physicals of not letting these athletes slide by that are showing warning signs of reds, whether it's things that male athletes mark or female athletes with their menstrual cycle. And she's like, you need to go see these professionals so you can stay healthy in your sport. And what they found is parents were actually feel more reassured that somebody was keeping an eye on that. Athletes, the last thing anybody wants to do is get injured. So when they are tying that to injury prevention, they're like, okay, I'm willing to go see those professionals. So we need to be more proactive with our younger athletes.
We're going to have to chat about this, Rebecca, because I don't know if we talked about this, but we actually own a foundation and SPAN is in schools talking to young athletes, coaches, because you're so right. What I'm seeing happen with the young athletes that we're dealing with is that they're getting diagnosed at the point of injury. What if
Mhm.
we could prevent that because we had better education, because we had better sports nutrition up front, because they understood some of the risk. But also too, I want to circle back to something that you said and kind of give an example of what I think sometimes can happen after spending so much time in the retail space and, functional medicine's become really popular. And we often try to kind of one size fits all. And I'll talk about just a lot of concepts around this with our athletes. But one of them is, a lot of parents will be, again, high protein. They're trying to lose or manage weight, very low or moderate carbohydrate. And they're transitioning these beliefs around food to their
Mhm.
young athletes. And those are some of the athletes I see at greatest risk because that isn't really what a healthful dietary pattern looks like for a growing individual. It looks like whole grains. It looks like fruits and vegetables, which are carbohydrates, by the way. Someone didn't know that the other day. It looks like getting, dairy products into the diet. It looks like some of these things that I think in some of what social media can tell our young teens or their parents healthy doesn't look like. And that tends to be one of the biggest risk factors that I see with kiddos coming in and their dietary patterns.
Right. And that's where, again, I'm never putting a shame on a parent. It's their body, they're right. But if they're going to come to see me for their athlete, I'm going to tell them, like, all right, you may choose not to do carbohydrates at your dinner, but that should be their main staple on that plate. You don't have to make something secondary, but get some Uncle Ben's rice cups or
Yeah.
get the pre-cooked quinoa that you can do in the microwave or make up a big side dish that then they can dish on for themselves because they absolutely have to have that. And while I don't get caught up in talking calories or carbs, sometimes I do bring that up just so they're aware when they hear how many grams we're talking about or how many calories a 17-year-old female cross country athlete needs, or like my daughter's in basketball right now and she's playing most of the game, and I'm like, I'm so proud of her. She's actually finally listened to her mom, and she's taking applesauce at halftime too. It's like
Isn't that crazy when that happens? It's like
years.
almost absurd.
There are holes in the bucket, and by that I mean it's hard to keep up with their energy needs. It's not uncommon for 2,500, 4,500 calories for an adolescent athlete.
Oh yeah, some of our male athletes who are in multiple sports and they're
Mhm.
overlapping 3-a-day practices. I mean, we've even gotten some of them up to 5,000-6,000
Yeah.
calories, depending on their size. I said that once at a nutrition conference I was speaking at for Google, and the other people on the panel were like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "No, this is literally what this looks like for our young athletes." And I just have to hit on this. Funny because last night my son, we finished dinner and they just started baseball, and so a lot of just practice on his own. He's lifting weights, and then they have baseball practice. They have it during school, and we got done with dinner, and he took one of the microwavable rice bags, and he was like, it was actually couscous, and he's like eating it. He's like, "Oh my gosh, I need some more of this," and it's like that is what he needs. Where a lot of
Mhm.
parents would say, "Oh no, you need to go grab protein." He needed those extra carbohydrate sources to restock all the glycogen stores that he needed probably for the next day of exercise. And I think that can be overlooked sometimes because we're applying this broad nutrition information meant for older adults or adults who are
Right.
managing weight to our young athletes.
Yep, and that's where it's always important. I say to them, "Do you know that to be true?" Like, if they're following some sort of fad, I'm like, "How has that worked out for you?" And then when we sort through the science piece of it, one thing, and I'm glad for some evidence-based podcasts like this, I cringe when I hear a podcast that's geared towards an athlete, and then all of a sudden they start bringing in weight loss studies, diabetes studies, and I'm like, those are not the same populations, but
They're
you
not.
just gave that recommendation, and that athlete's going to hear that carbohydrate, right? And like we talked about the glucose post, um, and then all of a sudden they're going to be eating low carb because they're worried they're going to bonk or have a blood sugar spike. That language does not even exist in our athletic population.
I
But
want to go back to that because I had a parent tell me this recently, that their young, healthy, active athlete was pre-diabetic. And I love the content. I have to stick on this for a minute that you put on LinkedIn. And again, you're always putting out such valuable content. I've learned so much from you. I'm going to have to take your certification now or encourage our sports dietitians who
I'd
listen to
love
this
to have you. I
podcast
love
to do it
teaching it.
too. I'm going to post it. But that basically talk a little bit about what you see in these athletes where they are having an elevated A1C. Um, Talk about why that is because they're
Mhm.
cutting back on carbohydrates, they're boosting protein. Protein is ultimately spurring an insulin response because people don't think about that very often. And then cortisol is released, which further then increases blood sugar. So break that down for people who
Mhm.
might have had a doctor tell them, well, they have a high A1C and they're this healthy, young, potentially underweight or at weight active athlete. Why would that be a sign to point to reds? Can you just kind of clarify that
Yep.
a little bit?
Yep, I'd love to do that, and I'd also like to explain the mechanism of cholesterol because 'cause they're both fairly similar, right? So our
Yeah.
brain's primal job is to protect us. And so if they're low in energy or low in glucose, it's not going to think, "Oh, let's shuttle glucose into these muscles so we can bounce off the wall of energy." It's going back to the brain. And so what will happen is insulin resistance basically kind of makes it hard for the lock to open to get the glucose in. And so then it ends up more in the bloodstream so it can get to the brain. So if somebody was to go get their blood work done and they get their glucose, that might be elevated. The other mechanism is there's a term called hemoglobin A1C, and it's basically where sugar will get recycled on a blood cell, and it's a saturation measurement.
Yes, basically
Um,
you're trending. It's not, this is why looking at blood glucose at one point in time is not good. It's telling us what's being carried on the cell over about a 3-month cycle. So we can see like really how saturated is
right.
glucose sitting in
Yep.
our blood. Yep.
So normal red blood cell should recycle about every 3 months, which is why people get their hemoglobin A1C if they have diabetes checked every 3 months. But in a malnourished individual, those red blood cells actually start to slow in how often they're recycled. Again, that's a luxury. That's not something that's primal. So that means more saturation can occur on that
Mm.
hemoglobin A1C. That does not mean that their average blood sugar is more elevated. So that's the second
So
mechanism.
basically, what I just heard you say, and I want to repeat this, is
Mhm.
that it can artificially look like a high A1C in these young kiddos with reds because they aren't recycling these red blood cells as frequently. So they are more saturated, looking like an elevated A1C.
Like if they didn't clean their retainer often, we would see like that buildup that continues on there, right? It's the
Yeah.
same thing that would happen within our blood cells, and our bone cells also recycle every 3 months. The third mechanism is reds is also inflammatory. So going back to our savings account, the key to open the savings account is cortisol. Cortisol is not bad. It's gotten demonized, but you shouldn't be calling upon that all the time
Yeah.
to help free up the savings.
So we've just taken a potentially a young athlete, male or female, who wasn't getting enough nutritional needs to invest in that saving account. It looked like they were pre-diabetic. It looked like they had high blood lipid levels. We're thinking, looking at if we were to compare that to an adult who maybe wasn't active, that would be the interpretation. But for these young kiddos, those two things are byproducts of them not getting enough calories and enough nutrition. So that's a
Mhm.
great watch out for our clinicians listening of deciphering this. And again, it's why it's so important that nutrition is personalized, because
Right.
that is different for a young athlete who comes in and they might be overweight or obese. That interpretation might look very different than a healthy young athlete.
Yeah, it's so tricky because our medical model typically looks at things in one direction, right? They're assuming it has something to do with their weight or that they're over consuming calories or food, but we can see similar mechanisms in the reverse. And so when we think about from the cholesterol standpoint, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, we have those savings accounts. So then when the body is having to break down our body fat, then the brain's like, hey, it looks like we're relying more on lipids for energy. Let's increase cholesterol esterase. So it actually increases the uptake of cholesterol to now be used as energy. So what do? They go in a doctor's office, cholesterol's elevated. They're told, eat more fruits and vegetables, move more, increase your fiber. So we've just thrown gas on the fire and actually made things.
Because they are breaking down those lipids, they have more circulating cholesterol in the blood, is really
Right.
what you're getting at. So then when they come in for a one-time check at the doctor's office, it looks like, oh, you have high cholesterol. Or same thing for blood glucose, you have high,
Right.
A1C.
Yep, and I'll explain that mechanism here in a minute. So then if they do that, now they've actually pulled their energy currency away or decreased it, which is the last thing we want, which can make their malnutrition worse. From the point of elevated glucose, now again, we always need to rule out that there could be something genetically or medical, but I always ask it needs to be considered in both directions. So somebody could have an elevated A1C for a couple different reasons. One is that as somebody becomes more malnourished, red blood cells are a luxury. So red blood cells are actually going to be slower to reproduce and they recycle every 3 months. So then that means that if it's in our bloodstream for longer, there's more opportunities to be saturated. So if it sits there longer, that makes sense that it's going to have more sugar on there.
Like putting a paper towel on a wet spot, the longer it lays there, the more it absorbs.
Exactly. Yep. Spoken like a true educator. Um, and then the other mechanism behind that is when somebody is in a low energy available state, especially low glucose availability, we see more inflammatory markers because cortisol is what is needed to free up our energy reserves. Cortisol is not bad, but it's not intended to be used all the time. I always say, like, if a deer flees the woods, it can take off and jump over 10-foot fences, but it can't do it time after time after time, right? Eventually it's going to
Yeah.
catch up. And so we'll see a higher blood sugar because it's having to free that energy up as well. So again, if somebody only looks at it from a weight phobic lens or thinking that they have too much insulin resistance, which that's another mechanism, insulin resistance can occur in that state because the brain is like, look, glucose going to a muscle right now is a luxury that you can't spare. The brain needs priority. And so it will shuttle the glucose up to the brain over the muscle, which is why we have insulin resistance at that muscle level.
That's fascinating. Yeah. See, all of this is so interesting. And I think sometimes
Mhm.
it's interpreted even by clinicians who are looking at maybe a young athlete's lab information. So this is great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that in diagnosis. What are the clinical metrics or what are the metrics that actually help us see this? So if we have clinicians that are listening and they're like, oh man, I had no idea that could be the case. Like, what are we looking for when we're diagnosing REDS?
So REDS is that diagnosis of exclusion. So it's really important how much we can get included in that. So I always look for a timeline. So if somebody comes into me, and a lot of times that might be they have an injury, I'll go back and look at when were they diagnosed with that injury? Were there changes in their training, nutrition, or life stressor? And then I actually go back another 3 months before that and I want to look at what changed. So if for some reason they've had normal blood work, but then boom, all of a sudden their cholesterol elevated at the exact same time that they decided to cut these food groups out, or their school schedule changed and they started missing their afternoon snack and didn't eat a full lunch, then we're like, let's see what happens when we restore nutrition if all of a sudden those blood work panels that have been off correct as well. So it's hard to get done in one session. I usually tell people it takes a couple of times to get enough data to look at that. But the Nikki Key infographic is really helpful because it has a person and then it kind of goes around all those organ systems. And so I'll have them tell me, like, how's your digestion? Do you even know what normal digestion is? Has anybody from a sports and REDS informed lens looked over your blood work? If they're adolescent, has somebody looked over your growth charts, etc.? And then we kind of go from there and start to look at what has changed in the last 3 months, 6 month, year, and then start doing a deeper dive in nutrition from there.
I will metabolically test my athletes and then I'll run their labs. And when I metabolically test them, what they should be running in calories for their height, weight, age is like
Mhm.
drastically reduced. Like I saw a patient the other day, I tested both him and his mom. He is a 16-year-old male athlete. He's been struggling with like small injuries, hasn't been able to put on weight. His metabolism is running almost parallel to a 50-year-old woman. And then I ran his labs and like testosterone very low. It was just fascinating to be like, this is what
Mhm.
red looks like. Your metabolism has basically slowed down to try to cover vital life processes,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
It's like dimming the lights in the house, and then eventually you're having to turn it off to make sure that I always use a saying to make sure you can pay the bills. And so having a nice V8 engine, again, is a luxury. You have
Yeah.
to be well fueled for that. Otherwise, it's just going to decrease that capacity, which is where they feel all sluggish and tired, or sleep quality is not very good.
Yeah. It was fascinating. Okay, talk to me about how it's treated. Once we know we've assessed it, how is it treated or managed? And what does that timeline look like?
Yeah. So I look at, is there anything acutely that we're kind of, emergency is not the right word, but like if they have an injury, right, we have to be more aggressive with nutrition because we have to make sure those building blocks are there to help them heal.
Yeah.
If they're coming in and they're like, I ran a marathon, it didn't go very well, I bonked. All right, the necessity is maybe not as urgent, so we can move things at a little bit different pace. But normally I look at three things. How long has that red state occurred? How many bouts of reds have they had previously? And then how steep was that energy deficit, right? So the longer it's been, the longer it's going to take to recover. And then how deep that deficit is like, how's that body going to respond trying to increase intake? Because the stomachs don't get bigger or smaller, but they do get more rigid or flexible. So there really is bumping up against your anatomy when you're trying to increase your intake. That takes a little bit of time, takes a little bit of, sometimes we have to cut back fiber. We have to increase fat intake. We have to decrease protein just so that stomach can handle more calories and volume. And then if it's repeat reds, that's where I really want to assess that we're not dealing with a disordered eating or eating disorder
Yeah.
that's been kind of masked or overlooked. And there's some other underlying issues that need to be resolved for them to stay in that healthy state.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I will usually say to my athletes within 4 to 6 months, assuming there's no like underlying issues that you're talking about, we can usually get them back on the right track. But it does take so much of what you're saying, which is sometimes because their stomachs have kind of become so much smaller and they're not as hungry, increasing fat before we do protein or before we do fiber, very contradictory to what you might give a traditional healthy individual in recommendations for
In our
changing their
fiber
food.
maxing society right now.
Yeah, and everybody's like fiber maxing and protein maxing, and I'm like, that's kind of
Mhm.
not what you want, and that's the contradictory thought I see a lot of these young athletes coming in with is they're so concerned about protein, they're not hitting calories, and it's like I have to flip that script for them to say calories is most important first, and then getting your protein is our second priority. So if that means you're going to eat your carbs first, great, because then you won't be as full and then you can stack on the other things. But I think those are really good points. And then in some, I've seen it take almost a year to get
So
back.
yep. From the hormonal and endocrine, we usually do say a full year. It's very similar to
Yeah.
eating disorders that the brain is like, all right, everything is in a feed forward mechanism I can trust because if there's any kind of, drops in deficit, we might immediately see that menstrual cycle get irregular. We might see blood work drop again. So I gently joke with them like you get no off days. You get off days to rest, but from your nutrition, you have to stay on top of that if you don't want to go back into another state of reds.
Yeah. Which again, like 9 out of 10 of these folks are coming in because they're having some sort of like ailment or injury, or they're facing a space where they're like, man, I really want to put on muscle, but I can't seem to make any, progress here. And so just it's really contradictory to what they're trying to do in their performance. What do you want parents or coaches to know? I mean, for those parents that are listening, for coaches that are listening, is they're looking at their athletes and helping us screen for this, because I think that's one of the things you mentioned you focus on in your class and program is how do you help other clinicians really come around and kind of screen? Can you talk about what you want those two groups of people to know?
Right. So for the parents first, I think it's really critical for them to understand that your child is not you, meaning that if for some reason you've decided that you want to go down some health endeavor that is going to cut out particular because you still have a growing athlete in the house. So I joke you got holes in the buckets that just constantly need energy. The other thing to look for is if you notice a change in the type of food that they're requesting or asking, if like, well, that's weird. On the grocery list, you always ask for the cereal, but now you're wanting cottage cheese. I mean, not the cottage cheese bad, but remember we had the cottage cheese craze too. To just lean in and be like, huh, are you burnt out from what you normally eat? I'm just curious why this change. And then if you do notice that they're wanting to eat meals on their own or make their meals, it's great if they're trying to start develop autonomy in those areas, but we need to make sure it's not control,
Yeah.
that they're trying to avoid what everybody else is having by being able to make their own foods. And then again, I think as a parent, always lean in by asking, tell me a little bit more about that rather than kind of like coming at them because they're going to immediately shut down.
Well, and like the whole base of a lot of those eating behaviors is based in control. And so sometimes that can create a vicious cycle of them trying to manage that. I'm excited because do you know Mandy Tyler?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So Mandy's going to come on and talk a little about eating disorders. I love this advice because it is something for us to just be aware of. And you would think, oh, great autonomy, you're cooking your own meal, etc. But if that starts to look different than being a part of family meals or
Mhm.
having certain kind of rules that are really rigid around food, it's important as parents for us to pick up on some of these things for our
Or not
kiddos.
eating what they make, that's a big red flag, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I can't give myself permission to eat it, but I'm going to watch you have joy from eating as a means of like taking pleasure. So that's another one. When it comes to the coaches, it's a little bit similar to that. Like, if all of a sudden you notice there's certain teammates that are maybe missing team dinners, or again, if they seem a little bit more withdrawn, and coaches can do it in reverse by using proactive power of nutrition. Hey guys, today's going to be a tough day. Everybody better show up well fueled. If you haven't had any time, I've got bars. I used to have a friend who's a school counselor that was a former college athlete, and she kept a loaf of bread and peanut butter that anybody could come into her counselor's room and make a peanut butter sandwich so they didn't go on empty. A lot of people can do that and then just continue to reinforce, like, don't show up on empty, just like you wouldn't show up without your shoes. And then if they feel like there's a concern, you can approach them without addressing it, be like, hey, you know what? Stay, you're a valuable member to this team. I really need you to be full energy and use your voice for your leadership, but you seem kind of not yourself. Have you explored everything you can nutritionally? You're saying, here's a professional I want you to take a look and they can assess for that. And so again, you're also valuing the other members of the team as well.
Yeah, I love that. What else? What did we not talk about that you would want to cover with our athletes, with parents, with coaches? What do you feel like we didn't hit on?
There's a couple things that come to mind. Like when we think about social media and who they're following, just remember, and I'm not saying that they're intentionally trying to be dishonest, but I have had the pleasure of working with a couple professional athletes that were sponsored by companies, and even they joked that they did not use their product because they didn't like it, but they're getting money from that company. So they obviously have to make it look like they are. So if sometimes they're following an athlete that they really love and they're like, oh, well, they're using XYZ, then I better do that. That's a slippery slope to go down because we're all our own N equals one. And I also find that it doesn't just go for young athletes. I think it goes for all of us. It doesn't do any good to start making changes if you don't have the proof that it works. I don't know about you, Stacey, but I had so many people that I've been like, well, how'd that work out for you? I wasn't running very well. I felt really tired, or even for myself, I could run, I was top of the team in the 2 mile, but my reaction time on the court started to decline. And that was one of the best things. I was a really quick guard, but I couldn't move around like I used to. And so that should have said, like, that's not working out for the intended purpose. And so I'm like, you all owe it to yourself. Like, what's the downside of being fed just to give it a shot to see how
Yeah.
well you can perform, recover, and also be an active, fun human being, friend that's walking this planet? Then decide if you want to make changes. You got to start there first if you feel like you're going to start exploring other changes.
I love that. I love the point about social media and being leery that people are promoting things to us there, sometimes that they're not using themselves. And so just to be really leery of that and to really think about that, maybe using an expert to see if that's something that's actually going to enhance your performance. I can't tell you how often I get patients who will come on a variety of supplements and many that have no indications for enhancing performance. It's just they've been marketed really well. And they're yet the base of their diet. I talked with Tony about this in one of our episodes. It's like, the base of your diet is the actual donut. It's the yeast part of the donut. The supplements are meant to be the sprinkles on top.
Right.
You can't come in and just think you're going to out supplement the donut being bad. Never have I had a really bad donut that the sprinkles just made it. It's usually vice versa. And so it's like,
Good one.
how do we help them figure out that some of these things have some really good indications and they're a great safety net, and other things, it really goes back to the base of, are you fueling yourself through
Yeah.
food?
And again, through that literacy, marketing plays on emotions. We're all victim to that, right? And so we have to be careful when we see those ads, or again, if we have an influencer that all of a sudden we don't find ourselves like questioning if we're not enough, because that's what they want. So that way you're inclined to
Yeah.
spend your money and think that that's going to be your answer and solution.
Yeah. No, I love that so much, especially because what we do at SPAN is focus on the whole individual and that they are fearfully and wonderfully made just as they
Yes.
are. And so I think that's an amazing thing to leave with. Speaking of that, do you have a favorite Bible verse that you love, or a favorite quote that you love as you think about just working with your athletes?
Yep. Okay, so I will openly admit I'm going to probably butcher. It was Proverbs, I think 16:3. I might be wrong. We may choose the journey, but the Lord determines the steps.
Oh, yes.
And
We may
so,
plan our path, but he establishes our
yes,
steps. And that is
yes.
so true. Yep.
And so, how many times it's going to work out better than you ever planned? And sometimes we just have to be along for the ride, but you're going to be okay.
Oh, I can attest to that. Amen. I will say sometimes you have this great plan and he's got a better one.
Yes, he does. Yep. I'm always like, Lord, can you give me like a snapshot of what it looks like at the end? Because right now, like,
And he's laughing. All of us people with control issues, when we get to heaven someday, he's going to have a good laugh with us of like, see, it worked out even better than you thought.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been wonderful. And I
Oh,
just greatly appreciate your knowledge. We're going to link all of your amazing resources and even your course. If we have any coaches listening or sports dietitians who want to take it, I need to get myself signed up because I'm
okay.
always inspired by your content. It's so
Oh,
good.
thank
So
you.
thank you.
Well, and thank you for this platform. We need more, especially with our young athletes, right? Like, we want them to do this from age 9 to 90.
Yes. Yeah. We're building humans for the lifespan, is what I always say,
Exactly.
not just for the youth sports span.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Stay tuned for more real world tips and conversations with coaches, athletic directors, current and former collegiate and professional athletes, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and other performance experts.
If this episode gave you something to chew on, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe. Nutrition is important, but let's be honest, we've all got to eat. So help us feed this podcast so we can keep fueling you.
Don't forget to join the SPAN Athletics community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media platforms including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at @span_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.